Jonathan, how are you? Oh, my. Hi, how are you? Thank you. Oh. Yes, how are you?
I'm just checking to make sure we have enough people present. We can start.
Okay. I'd like to go ahead and convene the meeting and welcome members to the January meeting. Happy New Year, everyone. 2024 is here. Pat will now call the roll.
Good morning, everyone. Harold Seguina, City of Avondale.
Here.
City of Buckeye, Dan Cotterman. City of Chandler, Ryan Peters.
Here.
City of El Mirage, Crystal Dykes. Town of Fountain Hills, Dave Trimble. He should be joining shortly. Town of Gilbert, Mary Goodman.
Here.
City of Glendale, Shahid Abbas.
Present.
City of Goodyear, Winnette Reed.
Present.
Maricopa County, Sean Pierce. City of Mesa, Chris Brady.
Here.
City of Peoria, Kevin Burke.
Here.
City of Phoenix, Mario Paniagua.
Here.
Town of Queen Creek, Bruce Gardner.
Here.
City of Scottsdale, Mark Milanchenko. City of Surprise, excuse me, City of Surprise, Tracy Montgomery.
Tracy Montgomery here.
And City of Tempe, Rosa Inchausti. Chair, we can begin.
Thank you. If a committee member would like to ask a question or make a comment during the meeting, please type your comment in the box and it will be read aloud and answered. All meeting attendees, please mute your computer, microphone, or your phone. So now, next up is public comment.
Mr. Crowley?
The public will be provided with an opportunity at this time to address the committees on non-agenda items and all action agenda items for the joint RPTA and VMR meeting agendas. Up to 3 minutes will be provided per speaker unless the chair allows more at their discretion. A total of 15 minutes for all speakers will be provided.
The 6th of January is my Christmas, so Merry Christmas to everyone coming up. And I'm hoping that the gifts on your plate will be more responsibility for what the plan is and what it's coming up to be. I need you to bifurcate the agencies, and that with the plan coming up, says that for rail, it's going to be only giving 3.5%. And I look at the old plan that they wanted to go to the voters, and in that the rail said that it needed $1 billion for maintenance. So I need it bifurcated. And I've been up here how many times saying the rail needs to be looking at the heavy rail as also a part of the solutions in that. And I just happen to have the December 12th Republic, and there's an article on what? Rail for the Valley and Amtrak and that. But are you guys aware and have any plans to help facilitate? Oh, no, because you just sat there and done what when it comes to the plan. I also note that it's going to say that you're going to continue on what you're doing, which is zero. How many of your communities have done any bus expansion? Where are you using those funds? I look at that 40% of the monies go to staff. How does that put a bus on your roadways? I look at Gilbert and Chandler. Chandler right now has a bus on Ray Road. Is there any reason the connectivity to the airport isn't there? You don't work together. You don't do it right. Like I said, with the new one coming up, where's the responsibilities of each of your communities? I look at Peoria has how many bus routes? I look at all of your communities. Where are the infrastructure? Where are your bus stops? There's 1,100 that haven't been built. Why? Then we get the statement of, well, there's no funding. Well, I noticed that in the rail part, we'll be spending how many hundreds of millions of dollars. But in the bus part, you've allocated how much for expansion and et cetera? Zero. So when this new stuff comes to a vote, I know that it's MAG that has to decide how you do things. But unless there is equitability, as in each of your communities getting the amount of funds that they're deserved, and then applying it to the system and doing both circulators and connectors, that I'll be campaigning against it. And with it being a 60% that you have to get to pass it, and that in the past you haven't even got that, having somebody campaign against it is not going to do well. So unless you want to fund it right, think about what you're going to do with no funds at all.
Anyone else? Thank you. All right, next is the Chief Executive Officer's report. Ms. Mefford Miller, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Joint Committee. Happy New Year. Welcome back after a month recess in January. Though it is the 3rd of January, it has been a busy year already at Valley Metro. We launched the transition of our East Valley bus operations and maintenance. The transition from TransDev to Keolis officially occurred at midnight on January 1st. Though it is early, the weeks and days leading up to the transition and the days since have gone very well. We are delighted to have the Keolis team on board. We have successfully accomplished our service goals over the last few days, which is always a challenge when we're experiencing a contract transition. We are not quite fully staffed, but near fully staffed in our critical areas, including operators and mechanics on the Keolis contract. Keolis shares our focus on customer experience and delivering a consistently excellent customer experience and developing and engaging the Keolis team performing on behalf of Valley Metro. I congratulate our operations team. Tom Young is our Deputy Chief for Transportation. Mike Powell, who's out on scene now, our Chief Transportation Officer. Darren Curry and his team on maintenance have done excellent work, long days and nights in the last couple of weeks. I'd like to give you brief updates on our capital projects. Our Northwest Phase 2 began pre-revenue operations last week on December 29th. That means you'll see trains operating on the corridor from 19th and Dunlap to the new terminal station at Metro Center. We are targeting a revenue service date for January 27th. We are approximately 83% complete with our systems integrated testing. And at this point, we are continuing to work with ADOT on our state safety certification and oversight and completing a number of punch list items at the station, including solar installation, park and ride, final punch list items for the garage, the operator facility, and a commissioning of some of the art lighting, which you can actually see in the upper right corner. Next slide. Some highlights of the station, beginning at the left at our current terminal at 19th and Dunlap. You can see the tie-in as we move further north. Center is 25th and Dunlap. And then far right is an overhead image of the station as it currently looks at the Metro Center site, which is currently under demolition now. So very exciting, a lot of activity happening at Metro Center. And we are so excited to share the opening date, which is going to be Saturday, January 27th. So it's coming in fast. We are very happy. And it's through the great work of this team, including Trevor Collin and Tony Santana of our engineering department, that we are able to deliver this project on scope, on time, and within budget. Meanwhile, we continue to be very busy on the South Central Corridor. This project is currently about 78% complete. We're completing at last our roadway and third-party utility work, which we have been engaged in for some time. Several months ago, we really came up out of the ground on the southern portion of the corridor. We have 6 of our 8 stations now under construction. The photos here, just to do a little bit of placemaking. Top left is Western Canal at baseline, where we've been doing roadway widening. Bottom left is our traction power substation at Cocopah. We're continuing to do interior building work there. And then right is Broadway at Tamarask. This is our Broadway station. A lot of work has been done there. Excavation has been completed, and our overhead catenary system foundations, you can see right down the center, have been laid. This project has been a long time in the making, but it's wonderful that we can deliver back to the community that real visible work as we move beyond the earthwork and the third-party utility work. The progress is palpable every single week on the corridor. Next slide, please. And then finally, meanwhile, in downtown, you can see that track work in progress. If you walk around downtown, if you haven't had the opportunity, you see the new stations. It feels like there should be revenue service there. They're nearly complete, and there will be service soon enough next year. That concludes my report, Madam Chair. Any questions I may answer for you?
I am not seeing any. Great job. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right, next is the consent agenda, and it's presented for action. Are there any questions, or if there are any items that need to be pulled for separate discussion on this particular consent agenda? I am not seeing any. So I'd like a motion for a motion and a second to approve this consent agenda, items 3A through 3B.
Move approval of the consent agenda. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. All right, Ms. Medford Miller to introduce the origin and destination study.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to invite Aaron Xavier to the podium to provide an overview of our recent origin destination study results. We periodically conduct an origin destination study. This is a detailed study that gives us really a few different data sets. Number one, it helps us understand who is traveling on the system, what their characteristics are, what their trip purpose characteristics are, where they're going, what type of trip it is, and then geographically where they're actually traveling. This helps us inform our system design. This is going to be a very critical data set as we move through our upcoming comprehensive operational analysis and take a fresh look at where and when our routes are actually operating. It also gives us a gauge on customer experience, what riders are and are not satisfied with. And you'll see some of these themes repeated in the next agenda item, our strategic plan. Aaron?
There we go. So I'm usually a little bit of a light speaker, so I really need this here. So thank you, Jessica. That was a really good introduction to what I'm about to talk about, so I won't labor any of those points that you've made. But I will go through essentially the study background and purpose just very quickly, talk about the travel patterns that we've seen in this survey, the changing rider needs, and the people that are actually on the system, and some of the conclusions that we were able to draw from this study. At any time, feel free to raise hands or ask questions if something bears a little bit more explaining. So as Jessica mentioned, this study has several purposes. So many of them are kind of ticky-tacky administrative purposes like Title VI civil rights analyses, MAG model, and STOPS model inputs, as well as supporting before and after studies for the capital projects like the one that we just discussed earlier. And the survey goes over all the different modes that we have: light rail, streetcar, local bus, commuter, circulators. And we do this every 3 to 5 years. So this is the first look that we've had at the system in this fashion since COVID. So it's been very anticipated to see, who stayed with us, who didn't. And it really gets to that last point on the purpose of the study, which is to understand the riders' travel patterns and demographics, as Jessica mentioned. So when we say that, a couple of questions come to mind, at least for us, in the planning division, which are who stayed and left since 2019, essentially before and after the pandemic. How have the travel patterns changed? How have the needs changed of the riders that have remained with us, and perhaps those who have left us when you compare the 2023 and the 2019 study? And how will this inform our adaptation to higher productivity? And I should mention, as we do this every few years, we have a lot of good longitudinal data that we can draw on to see how things have changed, not since just the pandemic, but also all those different surveys as well, since a lot of the questions are repeated for that purpose. So the survey was collected February to May of this year, so mostly in the spring, about April, May time, when we kind of see our peak between when schools are still in session, the snowbirds haven't quite left yet. So it's a really good representative sample of all the different folks that we get on our system. These are intercept surveys that are collected on tablet PCs, as you see in the picture in the background. The survey is about 31 questions. We try not to keep folks on the train too long or the bus. Going with those full surveys. We got about 20,000 surveys on the weekdays and 2,500 or so on the weekends. So the weekday survey amount allows us to do a good amount of weighting to an average day in April, which again, we try to make it a representative sample. So it's essentially an intuitive thing when you look at the survey and say, well, we got maybe 10 or 100 surveys, but how does that actually factor up to ridership on an average day, and how representative is this particular survey or this group of surveys relative to the whole? So some of the notes on travel patterns, just to get the elephant in the room out of the way, something that we obviously all know is that ridership fell significantly since COVID. So here are the weighted amounts of survey data that we got from this year's survey to the right, as well as the past several surveys going back to 2007. One thing you'll note is that the rail takes up a much larger percentage of the ridership than it has previously, which in part is due to the faster recovery of the rail. So we've seen a much higher ratio of rail-only and bus and rail trips relative to bus-only trips. The travel time distribution is telling us a couple different things, and I guess I should step back a bit to note that the sampling that we do before we even go out into the field is proportion to the ridership that we see on the system. So the stuff that I'm showing here does also mirror what we're seeing in the ridership, but we do that to kind of make sure that we're not oversampling or undersampling a certain route or time of day. So a couple of things that we noted for the travel time distribution, as you can see here, 2019 graphs are on the top, 2023 graphs are on the bottom from the survey, buses on the left, rail is on the right. And so a couple of things we noted were that the tails at the end of the day and the beginning of the day were significantly higher than they have been previously. At least, you can see that easily on the bus graph on the 2023. And for the rail 23, you can see that the peaks are a lot flatter, especially that PM peak has flattened out significantly. So this is kind of showing us something that we've seen in the ridership data again, that the primacy of the peak is kind of waning, because prior we used to do a lot of planning to the commuter or the peak hour rider on the system. Whereas more recently that hasn't really been as predominant use case or as a high demand as it used to be. One thing we did know that hasn't changed too much since the beginning of the pandemic or pre-pandemic was the amount of transfers that folks were making. Because, as we in the planning division were going over the survey, we had a couple of theories about, who left, who stayed, and why have they stayed or left. So one theory that we had was that maybe all those folks with the inconvenient trips that maybe had a transfer or two in them were being peeled off or finding another way to travel. But that doesn't seem to be substantiated by the transfers that we're seeing in the survey. So about 47% of trips had transfers, which was pretty much at the level that it was pre-COVID, though it is still slightly lower than it was in those previous surveys, but not significantly so. So this map does take a little bit of explaining, but this was something that we looked at when we were trying to map out where folks are going to and coming from in the survey to see what areas are gaining trips, what areas are losing trips, and to where and from where, kind of relatively speaking, from the previous survey compared to this survey. And so just a couple of things to note. The thickness of the lines that are shown are the degree to which the travel has changed. The color is whether they have grown or shrank. So the reds, thick red line shows you that a lot of travel between those two destinations has decreased. And a thin green line in opposition shows that there has been some pickup, but not a significant amount. So a couple of things that you can see in this kind of cat's cradle if you stare long enough, kind of like a magic eye, that the most significant proportional growth occurred in some of the longer intercity trips. So you see a lot of trips going into and out of Tempe, a lot of trips from Tempe to kind of North Phoenix or even close to Glendale. But interestingly, not a whole lot of relative change to the downtown City Phoenix area. So granted, City Phoenix has always been a big attractor of trips, so that it hasn't had too much growth doesn't mean that there's not a lot of travel occurring to that area, obviously, but just relative to the previous pre-COVID survey, not too much change. So the most significant shrinkage seemed to occur in some of the shorter trips. So you may be able to theorize why that is. Maybe some folks are just getting e-bikes or finding a different way to peel off those shorter trips instead of taking transit. And in the background, I should note that there's a population change kind of heat map that you may be able to see. With the purple, there's kind of the areas where the population has grown more significantly, highlighted in the purple. And interestingly, again, going back to the theories that we had, usually we would just think, the more folks that are coming in, the higher the ridership is going to be, just because you're going to be proportionally peeling off more people as the population grows in those areas. And that seems to be the case if you were to just look at, Tempe and say, well, obviously they have a lot of population growth. You can see it on the map. They have a lot of green lines there, so a lot of ridership growth. But then that doesn't really carry over to places like downtown Phoenix, as I mentioned, which obviously is having a pretty big boom in terms of development. Anybody that, came here today sees all the cranes and all the residential development that's happening downtown. And so that kind of leads us into the next section of what are some of the explanatory factors on why some areas are seeing high population growth and seeing high ridership growth and others aren't. So that gets us into the rider demographics and needs. And so one thing that might be a hint to why that differential ridership growth is the case, we have the home-based work trip no longer being the most common. So it may seem like not a super significant change, but that blue, the purple box there at the bottom was the home-based work trip. Again, going back to the point that I made earlier, where often we would plan, a lot of the service that we had to the commuters and the home-based work trips, people traveling during the peaks, coming downtown, et cetera. But we, over the pandemic have seen that the return of the home-based work trip hasn't been quite as strong, I think, as some of the other trips as, the home-based other. The other isn't really a super helpful category. So that would include things like airport travel, medical travel, going to shopping and recreation and things of that nature. So that may explain why a place such as downtown Phoenix, which has a lot of office space and a lot of work spaces, is not seeing as much growth in terms of ridership and travel patterns as say downtown Tempe, which does have a lot of those entertainment venues, I think, popping up, and also the student population as well, which you see as the home-based university is a slightly growing sector as well. So another thing that we noticed was the trip purpose on the weekend. So I should note that these are for the weekday. these are for the weekends. The weekday and the weekend trip purposes do seem to be kind of converging in their makeup, where we see actually more people coming in to work on the weekends relatively. It's kind of like a small uptick, whereas the home-based other is going down. So it's almost like they're starting to converge a little bit more. And we see that as well, if I were to go back to the distribution over time, that the peaks don't look like they do weekends versus weekdays. And so I think not only in terms of trip purpose, but in terms of the way that the trips are distributed over time, we're seeing a kind of convergence to a much more spread out distribution of demand for trip purpose and time. So going back to our kind of preconceived notions about why people are leaving or staying, one was that probably a lot of folks that left had cars or were probably more transit dependent for one reason or another. But interestingly, again, we get kind of shot down in that hypothesis by seeing the number of vehicles in the household for the survey respondents was relatively similar to the level of car ownership in previous surveys. So it hovered at right about 50% or so. So you do see a slight uptick at from 51 to 55% from 2019 to 2023, but not as significant as I think we were hypothesizing. But the flip side of that coin is that a lot of the riders currently don't have driver's license at a higher rate than they did previously. So nearly half of riders now lack a driver's license, which is a 7% increase from 2019. And if you dig a little bit into the demographics, just as income, for example, as was requested at RTAG previously when I gave this presentation, you see that the low income is significantly higher among that proportion of those who lack driver's licenses. So I think it was maybe 76% were considered low income, which here for Title VI purposes we define as I think 150% of the HHS level of poverty. Whereas the driver's license owning folks had it at about 61%. So kind of a significant increase in low income in that population. So rider gender was another very interesting thing that kind of jumped out to us when we were looking over the survey. The gender gap continues to widen with men outnumbering women nearly 2 to 1. There are a couple of theories of why that is, but it's still kind of unclear. But it's definitely clear that as we look to expand our ridership, as we see women kind of peeling off the system at a much greater level than men, that there may need to be something done about that in one way or another to attract that demographic that is kind of slipping through our fingers here. So rider household income does kind of verify one of the hypotheses that we had about who's staying and who's going. Probably some folks that are a little bit more transit dependent, a little bit more on the lower income side of the scale. So the purple line shows the 2023 survey results for the distribution of income for the survey respondents, and the green line shows the pre-COVID or 2019 level. So one of the big obvious things you see is the huge spike at the very lower end of the scale where folks are essentially making less than $5,000 a year. So partially this could be students who just say, I don't technically have an income, I guess, because I don't have a job and maybe I live off of my parents or something to that effect, not fully understanding the question, but I think a lot of it also comes from the increased patronage of the system by the homeless in the area pre-COVID versus now. And you also do notice a bit of a flattening in the middle of the income curve, where some of the more middle income folks seem to be dropping off. Smartphone ownership, pretty high, as you would kind of hypothesize. 93% of owners or riders do have a smartphone, which is only up 2%. So it's kind of plateauing. In the previous survey, we were seeing a pretty strong uptick, and now it's kind of leveling off with kind of that recalcitrant 7%, I guess, not wanting to have a smartphone or just not able to have a smartphone. And importantly, 90% of the riders have a smartphone with a data plan, which is important when you think about how folks are getting the information for the system. If you're out there with a smartphone but you don't have a data plan, you can't really access a lot of these smartphone kind of capabilities that we have, at least on our app, with real-time tracking and mobile payment, I believe. So we do see a dramatic increase of the digital wayfinding that has continued to grow. On the graph you see from 2007 to 2023, significant increase, so 16% to 87%. Conversely, the offline tools like the transit book, which, rest in peace, customer service, Next Ride, and things of that nature have dropped to just 13%. So now pretty much 9 in 10 folks are relying on those online tools for information. So in conclusion, the all-purpose trips for transit are seeming to, be on the rise and kind of a convergence with the weekend trip patterns that we've seen historically and currently. So more trips for errands, social events, universities, et cetera. And weekday and weekend patterns are converging. So not only in terms of the trip purpose, but again, as I said, the way that the distribution is made over time. The income curve is flattening in the middle, and that spike at the low end does mark a dramatic increase for folks at the very lower end of the income scale, but still a significant decrease in those that are kind of in the middle. And the gender gap has risen significantly, so men outnumber women 2 to 1, and we can trace back perceptions perhaps to safety or comfort, but I think the jury is still out and definitely a place where we can improve. So most riders still come from zero-car households, so not really a sharp increase in the proportions that were predicted, but those who cannot drive did rise significantly, going back to the driver's license point. And riders continue to migrate toward online info. Riders overwhelmingly do have smartphones with data plans, which I think is enabling this new kind of surge in using those tools. And the addition of real-time locations, mobile fares, et cetera, has definitely paved the way for that increased use. And trips involving rail have jumped significantly from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. The streetcar did contribute significantly, and that is continuing to surge as we've checked the ridership on that. But generally, rail's ridership is making a stronger recovery, I think, overall than the bus, which is reflected in the proportions that we're seeing among riders. So, are there any questions, comments, or data that folks would like to see followed up on?
Brady?
Thank you. Let me just, I just want to see if I can pull this all together. I think you were doing a little bit of that. So the trend is most likely it's now what we're seeing is trending more towards a male, lower income, without a driver's license, without access to a car, and taking more of these frequent trips kind of that are not relatively related to home base. They're so it's not work related, most likely. And I think your conclusion that you gave under key takeaways, I think is actually a very telling outcome. I think you're right. I think it does go, I don't know if I think it goes directly to perceptions about safety on light rail. Because if those are the trends, whether we like it or not, more men, lower income, that are not there going to work, using light rail to go to work or transit to go to work, I think that can be an intimidating factor for families and females. So I think that's something we just need to address. But I think this kind of is one of those, you use a lot of anecdotal, statistics or conclusions. And I think this is actually one where the anecdotal conversation is now supported by your survey results. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I think you're pretty much on with that. I know, as I ride the system, I do see things that kind of make me think, what is causing the trends in this survey here. And I think they may have hit on some in that. I think part of it too is just the level of ridership as well, that the fewer folks perhaps that are on, any given vehicle can sometimes create a perception that, there's not many people around, especially in the train when, nobody's really around except for, you and maybe those other few people, can get a bit dicey. So I think we have a survey that was done last year by I think the security team and I believe it was communications to try to get at some of the issues that you mentioned, essentially about perceptions of safety, how safe do folks feel, so that we can really nip that in the bud so that we can continue to chase this segment of the market.
Mario?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One quick question on those numbers. Is that the overall bus and rail for the men and women?
Yes, that's a good point too. Because I believe City Phoenix had asked at the last meeting, does this division essentially stand when you split out modes? And it does. So when you look at, just bus or just rail or bus and rail riders, that difference is still there in terms of the male-female split, about 2 to 1.
Okay.
If I may, Madam Chair, one of the areas, as Aaron mentioned, where we see a decrease in ridership on the bus side in particular, and in total trip making, it's home-based work trips, so the journey to work, the commute. And typically in transit nationwide, we see a relatively high proportion of women, particularly women aged 45 to 64 in transit demographics. We haven't sliced the data in this way, but I would expect that we're seeing some reduction in that because we're losing some of those journey to work trips to telecommuting or to other modes. I don't want to underplay the impact of the perception of personal security because I think that's a very big factor. But so too is the loss of customers, particularly women customers who may be using express bus, rapid bus, or local bus to access work.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing any, so no action is required on this item. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And the next item is the strategic plan approval.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to invite Hillary Foos, our Director of Communications and Strategic Initiatives, to provide a presentation. This is the final draft of the strategic plan. Our purpose in bringing this to you today is to ask for your feedback this last time before we present a final draft plan to the board later this month. Hillary.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, thanks for your time. Again, we're here for you to take this plan through adoption. We're excited. This has been a lot of work by the Valley Metro team and our consultant Guidehouse. In November, if you recall, we gave you a very detailed presentation of the data analysis as well as the goals and initiatives that are really coming forward through this effort that's laid out here. Guidehouse and our team, and I'm going to go through in the next slide a little bit of detail on all the data and surveys that we collected, but through various steps here, the current assessment, the future state assessment, as well as the development of a strategic framework. And we're also now in development on an implementation plan, really focused on FY25. We're here in front of you to get to hopefully get the FY25 through FY30 strategic plan through adoption. Just to remind us of the process, this has really gone on across this past year, really kicking off in the spring. We brought on Guidehouse, which is a national strategic planning firm, and we took many steps. Really in the summer, we did surveys, really looking to gain feedback from you, your staff, our staff, our frontline workers, and riders and non-riders. Also across the summer, we did a lot of data analysis through Guidehouse and peer system benchmarking and interviews, certainly with the Valley Metro leadership, our board members, as well as peer agencies across the country. As you may recall, we also had the opportunity to take our board offsite in September to really give them an in-depth overview of the current and future state assessment and vet with them the draft goals that were really coming up through this process and gaining their feedback. We did a detailed presentation for the RTAG, the city staff group, and then this body in November, and a study session in November with the board as well. Just to take you through next steps and where we're at, that first row in this graphic is we really are in development of an action plan through, and in your packet, you will see that we have the plan there for your review. We have 9 goals that are really coming out of the plan, about 40 different initiatives across this 5-year plan. We really pulled out from the plan what we feel is important across FY25 and developing an action plan around that. That's that first row, developing that action plan as well as performance measures associated with that. Right now, we are taking this plan through adoption, as you can see by that red line. And then here in the next few months, we will be taking any action items that have budget implications through the FY25 budget review and approval process, really led by Ken and his team. So you'll be seeing a lot more detail of that action plan and those budget implications. And then we will start reporting out. Certainly, it's important that we create transparency around the plan. We will start reporting out from those performance measures, really beginning in the May timeframe and then throughout the ongoing fiscal years. This chart is just to show you how we plan to report out to you all. As you saw in your packet, there are 9 goals, really how we intend to connect communities and enhance lives and deliver excellent customer experiences, but there are 9 goals. It would be a lot of data to report out to you every quarter. So we are asking and proposing to break it out. Really, the items in blue are more external facing goals, and we would report those out to you on a quarterly basis. And you can see beginning that would in the blue in February. And then green is really those that are maybe more internal facing, and we would begin reporting out to those to you also on a semi-quarterly basis as well. So, so in the May, which would be our first reporting out period, we would report out on those items listed there, our investments in staff, leadership and execution, board governance, financial sustainability, et cetera. So every quarter, we would be providing you guys with an update on a set of goals really intended to provide transparency and with you guys with updates on how we're moving forward with the strategic plan. Any questions on this slide? Okay. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but ultimately we're seeking your adoption on the strategic plan and the opportunity to move it forward to our board.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes.
Well, just to be clear, so when I go into the strategic plan, we are talking about the 9 goals. That's what's listed. I don't know what slide it is. 7 on your strategic plan. Does that look right? Are those the goals you're talking about?
It looks like in the strategic plan, it was,
Look like
Slide.
this?
yes,
What page are you on? Oh, it's
It's-
even better.
9. It starts with
Oh,
connect
yeah,
communities
okay.
against life
It's
at
the
the
same one,
top.
it's just a different.
And then there's 1 through 9 listed
Okay,
in
that
sort of
helps.
the
Okay.
house format.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
want to make sure I have the right
Sure.
one. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I do need a motion and a second to forward the fiscal year 2025 to 2030 strategic plan to the boards of directors for approval.
So moved.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. Next item, travel expenditures and solicitations. This item is presented for information only. No, yep, nothing there. No action required. Are there any current events, future agenda items from the committee membership? And I'm not hearing anything. All right, the next meeting of the TMC RMC is scheduled for Wednesday, February 7th, 2024 at 11 a.m. So that concludes the joint meeting. We are ready to convene the Transit Management Committee meeting. Again, the consent agenda is presented for action. Consent agenda 1E is recommended April 2024 transit service changes is being pulled from the consideration today. Consent agenda items 1F, 1G, and 1H reference the Valley Metro rail budget. These items will be updated to reflect the Valley Metro RPTA budget. And I am looking for a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda items.
Madam Chair, this is Kevin Burke from Peoria. If possible, I'd like to pull item 1C from the consent agenda.
And Mr. Burke, do you want to pull that, get your information, and then we vote on the consent agenda, or would you like it a separate vote?
I'm indifferent.
Okay. Then let's pull that and go ahead and look for a motion and a second to approve items 1A to 1B, 1D, and items 1F through 1H. Motion and a second.
Move approval.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. All right. Mr. Burke is looking for information on 1C.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to invite Tom Young, our Deputy Chief for Transportation, to the podium to provide some background and an overview of the action being requested today with respect to demand responsive dispatch software. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Jessica. Excuse me here. It hasn't been a lot of sleep the last couple of weeks, getting ready for the transition. So Chair Reed, members of the committee, current demand response services managed by Valley Metro include the regional 88 paratransit system and our Ride Choice program. The ADA Paratransit program provides service to the majority of all jurisdictions part of LA Metro, where the current Ride Choice program is providing services for 13 jurisdictions. For our current ADA Paratransit program, let's see if I can get this to. So our current ADA Paratransit program, we're utilizing Trapeze Pass for our scheduling and dispatch software. So Trapeze Pass manages all the services. Trapeze was introduced to Valley Metro through our contract with Transdev in 2017, as Transdev is the provider, was required to bring software to the table. In 2020, we actually worked to get the licenses of the Trapeze software transferred from Transdev to Valley Metro. And the primary reason for that transfer to Valley Metro was so Valley Metro had full control and ownership of all of the data, the ridership. This proved very important at the time that we transferred providers back in October of this year. We were able to provide that software. Currently, our Ride Choice program, we have a separate contract for Ride Choice management, and that program is managed through Easy Transport. It's a software that was developed by MJM Innovations. Under that contract, once again, the provider was required to bring the software to the table as part of the contract award, and they have full control over all information and data. Future demand response programs, we are anticipating to be implementing microtransit in the future for jurisdictions that are interested in those programs. At this time, Valley Metro does not have demand response software that can actually manage that system. So in 2020, working with all jurisdictions, and it was actually a pretty detailed process, we made the decision to change our service delivery model. So right now, ADA Paratransit was managed independent of itself. We had a contractor for that, which brought the full management staff. The Ride Choice program was also managed separately and brings their own management. So the change that we brought to the table was we wanted one joint administrator to broker all the services demand response together. So we would not only have efficiencies in staffing of management staff, but the call takers would be taking reservations for all demand response services and could be educating customers on the best service for their needs of that day. At the same time that we made the decision for that joint administrative broker, we started working with Trapeze to start developing software that would also go further than just managing the ADA Paratransit program. Ride Choice is an alternative to the ADA program and comes with some unique service delivery options in different programs. So it was beyond the normal software that Trapeze provided. So that was like 2.5 years ago, we started working with Trapeze to develop the management software for the Ride Choice program. The beginning of 22, we also worked with Trapeze to implement 5 different modules to Trapeze. These modules would actually provide all the tools necessary to run all the demand response programs, and it increased the customer facing. So just to give you an idea, the notifications, this is the software that the night before will call a customer and say, remembered you scheduled a trip, this is the time. It also calls the customer 20 minutes before their vehicle arrives to remind them that the bus is on its way. That is the only module at this time that Trapeze has successfully delivered. And we had a date prior to October 1 because it was a function that Transdev was providing through another software. So we didn't want to lessen the services our customers were receiving during the contract transition. Web application allows customers to make reservations online. That was slotted to be implemented midsummer. It has yet to be implemented due to delays with Trapeze. Electronic payment or the Easy Wallet system allowed for customers to make their fare payment electronically and not have to carry cash. This has not only been delayed, but they have told us they need to submit change orders and additional cost in the development because they haven't completed the development. The big item here is their program would deduct the payment at the time a customer made a reservation versus at the time that the trip was taken. Many of our customers make reservations 2 weeks in advance. So paying the fare 2 weeks before the trip, we said that doesn't work. The mobile app, it was originally scheduled 5 months after web notification. That was so customers could use their smartphone. Once again, web app has not been implemented, therefore they haven't even started working on the mobile app. And then the big item is the ability to manage the ride choice program. At this time, Trapeze has said, you have all of the modules that would allow you to do it, but we can't pull it to the point where you can use it. They've been unable to tell us why it can't be fully implemented other than they need to make a lot of different modifications and increase the cost for this implementation. And they also have not been able to tell us if and when they will be able to manage the Right Choice program. So today, we're sitting here, the joint administrative broker, we did go live with the broker on October 1. However, the only program they're managing is the ADA paratransit program at this time. When we entered into our ride choice contract with MJM Innovations under the current, we awarded them a 1-year contract with an option for up to 1 year of extensions. And this primarily extension was if software was delayed. Right now, it's been delayed indefinitely. So we're looking, I worked with procurement to where we may be able to extend it 1 year beyond November of 24, but we have to look and see what that would look like. And then the microtransit, Trapeze does not have any microtransit, or they have very little microtransit ability through their current software. Our optimum goal, and one of the pieces that's important to us for demand response software, is that we need one system that can manage all demand response software. One, so it can talk to each other. Two, so that we can be referring customers to the best service. And eventually we want to have the ability of commingling the services versus having duplicative services out there. So with the fact that Trapeze has not had the ability to deliver on the commitments that they actually made to us almost 2.5 years ago for the management of the Right Choice program, we want to take this step now and do a competitive procurement to see the software that's out on the market so that we can implement the full joint brokerage as we move forward. I can answer any questions you may have at this time.
I do have questions. So thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Young, for that explanation. Understand completely the frustration and why you want to change directions. I guess I just want to understand the ramifications of that. So one is that I would suspect, and I hope I'm not invoke any need to go into some sort of exec session, but I'm suspecting that they're violating some terms or have not fulfilled commitments. What are we looking at in terms of any sort of notices to them that they've failed, any sort of financial? I'm guessing we've made payments on this project. Do we have any of that money now available? Because I know that you're asking for $1.5 million new dollars in this process. So is any of that money available to be transferred to this new project? And then I guess my last question is more of the operational one. If we're looking to do kind of a single platform, is this something that member cities are going to need to adopt whatever that new software is as well, and cannot rely on those who already have trapeze in place.
Okay, so on the operational questions at this point, the actual cost, we pay an annual licensing fee, and our anticipation is the annual licensing fee will just move from trapeze over to a new system.
Sure.
So that's on that piece of it, we're not looking at it increases at this time. The jurisdictional piece right now, only 3 of the 4 jurisdictions operating their own system are using trapeze. One is using another platform. Valley Metro does do all of the eligibility certification at this point, and the trapeze systems do not talk to each other between Valley Metro, the city of Phoenix,
Okay.
and the city of Peoria. So we have developed a process for transferring of the eligibility data without the systems actually talking to each other. So this would not require all jurisdictions to move, although a single platform would be ideal as we move into the future, especially with commingling of trips between different demand response services. I know that was 2 of the, I think, 5 different questions.
If I could just, the one I wanted to come back to is, I mean, it sounds like these software additions were just that additions. They were beyond the annual license agreement. So I'm assuming that we paid money towards the development of those, or were all payments due upon delivery and we've not had to pay because they haven't been delivered. But I'm trying to get an idea of the finance. How much have we invested in this that we're now kind of walking away from and doing a new investment on a new product?
So okay, thank you for that question. That's the one that I did miss. The majority of the modules that we're working on right now, the payment came when they deliver the actual module. So stopping the project now will not commit us to the payments of the items that they have not delivered. Once again, going out to procurement right now, our procurement process is typically 9 to 12 months for it to occur. Our current licensing with trapeze would be ending about that same time. So there should not be any penalty at this point of choosing to go another direction. With a competitive procurement, trapeze can always propose on this and see if they can deliver also. So that'll be an option for them as we put this on the street.
So were there any funds left from this initial endeavor that can be transferred to the new endeavor, or?
Yes, there'll actually be funds that will not be expended. So we wouldn't carry it to the new project, but exactly what you're saying is it would be the same as that.
Okay.
So funds not expended this year.
Okay. Those answer my questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Mr. Brady?
Just a quick question. So it makes it sound like, and I get it, this evolved way beyond what the original intent was for the software. But my question is, across the country, I mean, we can't be that, are we that unique in trying to create this? In other words, is it consolidated, or where you're trying to bring all these services together under one customer experience? I mean, I just can't imagine in the world of transit that you have to procure all these separate different softwares to do. There's just got to be a comprehensive one. And I'm assuming that's how you're going to ask for the procurement. And you're going to already know what best practices out there so that we're not, so you're doing that. And then my question is, are you going to procure the software separately than before? You were making like a package deal? It was like a bundle, right? You were bringing, and then you would unbundle it after it got here, which I don't know that, I'm not sure why that would happen, but go back to are there best practices out there across the country that are being used in other major transit authorities that we can look to and say, that's what we're looking for, that's the procurement we're looking for, and tell procurement, we want this done in half the time you're telling us because we need it now.
Maybe I'll attempt to answer that question, Mr. Brady. So this is not a unique approach. It is a new approach. We are moving from a current model where the services are delivered separately and services are supported by their own technology modules. And the model that we aim to transition to is a model in which customers can plan, book, and pay for their trip using a single platform. With respect to demand responsive service, in the past, currently we have been operating paratransit service, ride choice service. We've got several of our member cities, of course, operating microtransit service as well. We would like to move to a commingled model. You see that reflected in the West Valley operations and maintenance RFP that is in review right now. We're reviewing proposals presently. So it's not unique, it's new. And this particular item, I think, is reflective of both our transition process and then Trapeze as a company just has not developed this particular module. Trapeze offers quite an array or a portfolio of transit tech products. However, they are not at the fore when it comes to non-paratransit dynamic dispatch of demand responsive service. There are a number of companies who are, and so we have seen best practices such that we're confident that we would receive successful bids from vendors that will allow us to adopt this model. And then separately, in parallel to this process, we're now procuring the operations and maintenance provider for that service. Does that answer your question?
All right, any other questions? I am not seeing any, so I do need, thank you very much. A motion and a second, 1C.
Move approval 1C.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Not hearing any, ayes have it. Next item is our PTA fiscal year 2024 mid-year budget adjustments.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Transit Management Committee. I'll walk you through the mid-year budget adjustment for RPTA. A little bit of background. We develop our budget very early before the fiscal year starts, roughly about 9 months ahead of that. And so really it's a plan, and sometimes, that has changed before the ink is dried. But we're really at a point now halfway through the year to true up our plan. So we have a combination of some board-approved contract change orders or contract awards that I'll talk about, as well as a couple other adjustments. By far the largest adjustment within our operating budget that we're asking for today is really our fiduciary responsibility for managing and distributing public transportation funds, programming those. And so I'll discuss that regarding the City of Phoenix operated bus service. I do want to mention that we presented this to your city staff through the financial working groups as well as the regional transit advisory group last month, so they've seen this. All right, so jumping into the items that the board has already reviewed and approved for this fiscal year that impact this year's annual budget. As Jessica mentioned, we have a new bus contractor in place that began servicing our East Valley this month. And at the time the budget was developed, there was a competitive solicitation on the streets. And so we did not yet know those rates. We used our best independent cost estimate, but ultimately the rates that the board approved and that were awarded the contractor were slightly higher, so we're correcting that now. Same thing on our van pool contract. We did have an RFP out there, and the contract was awarded a little bit higher than planned. And they started effective January 1st as well. So total adjustments, $4.5 million. On to a couple other ones that you might not be aware of. Our ride choice program has been very successful. Trips are forecasted to be higher than planned based on trends for the fiscal year so far. And we're also welcoming Litchfield Park into that program. And so combined, we're asking for another $1 million there. And then, as mentioned, the Phoenix operated bus, the largest portion of this budget adjustment, we received a larger estimate very late in the budget process last year. And so this is more of an administrative update. We didn't want to bring that very late in the game, causing some confusion. So we have those updated numbers there now. And again, Phoenix has available jurisdictional equity which is the public transportation funds available unprogrammed balance through the end of Prop 400, more than enough to offset the increase here. So essentially PTD is asking us to program that so they can draw those monies down for their service that they operate. So the total budget adjustment is $33.4 million. As far as sources of funds, the largest changes to public transportation funds, as mentioned, the City of Phoenix service being 100% funded with PTF. Slight adjustments to federal and fares for the Vanpool program. That program is 100% paid for by Vanpool riders. So 12% increase to the total funding. And then here's kind of a recap of those expenses by program. Picture out up by 31 million combined, and then slight adjustments to demand in Vanpool. Madam Chair, members of the committee, that concludes my presentation. The recommendations before you. I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Are there any questions? None?
I did have one question online.
Yes, Mr. Burke?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just trying to understand then, with these mid-year budget adjustments, are we kind of expecting that this is the base we're going to start from for FY25, kind of up 12% and then make the adjustments from there?
Thank you, Mr. Berg, for the question. Yes, you're exactly right. So our base starting point is the prior year's budget. However, we look at every single line item for any expenses that may have been more of a one-time, looking for any kind of underrun savings to adjust that base down further if that's prudent based upon the activities program for the year.
Okay. I just want to be prepared because I think that number is going to look even worse when you get to the new budget cycle and you think, well, now we're not just jumping 12%, we're jumping 18% or something of that note, and just recognizing we had a pretty substantial mid-year adjustment. But anyways, thanks for that explanation.
Yeah, and so just to add on to that, in case I wasn't totally clear, so if this revised budget is our starting point for Keolis, for example, we have an annual escalation built into 25's budget, and so the change would not be 12% plus; it would be whatever that board-approved annual escalation is within that contract, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, any other questions? I am not seeing any, so I'm looking for a motion and a second to forward to the Board of Directors approval of the mid-year budget adjustment for Valley Metro RPTA operating budget for fiscal year 2024.
Madam Chair, I move approval. Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Any members have any reports or current events they'd like to bring up? I am not seeing any, so that concludes this Transit Management Committee meeting, and the next one is February 7th, 2024 at 11 a.m. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this, I'll convene the meeting of the Rail Management Committee meeting. And so first on the agenda is the consent agenda, items 1A, 1D. Do I have a motion?
Motion for approval.
Motion. Second. And a second. All in favor, please say aye. 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 All right, so that takes us to the mid-year budget adjustment for rail. Back to you.
Again, I'd like to invite Tyler Olson right back to the podium.
Mr. Chair, members of the Rail Management Committee, I do want to make a brief note on this presentation before I get started. We usually ask for action, just as we did on the RPTA for any mid-year adjustments. However, the agenda showed this information as an informational item instead of an action item by mistake. So our apologies on that. We will get that corrected for the board. So we will present this for information and of course address any questions that you may have and ask that the board provide action on it. Valley Metro Rail's capital program is in need of some changes, no changes to the operating budget. All of these adjustments are really based on updates to construction activity and milestone payments around those vehicles as well. All construction projects have previously been approved by FTA in member cities for a multi-year project budget. We're not changing the multi-year project budget at all. This is really just a timing true up based upon construction activities that are hitting this year. All right, so first off, future project development, our I-10 West extension has been delayed really based upon ongoing discussions within the region and regional stakeholders. So we're not going to get as much of that work done this fiscal year, so we're tuning that back a bit. Our construction team recently received updated cash flows and project schedules from our contractors on both South Central Extension as well as Northwest Phase 2, resulting in adjustments upward based on the current state of those construction activities. Tempe Streetcar, we received an updated milestone payment schedule for the remaining milestone billings for the Brookville streetcar fleet. So again, no increase to the total multi-year budget, just truing up those payments along with some payments for the spare parts associated with that project. Both Gilbert Road and system-wide improvements updates are needed based upon the milestone payments for the Siemens light rail vehicle fleet, the additional cars required for our current service as well as future service. So total increase there is $65.3 million. On the sources, majority of the increase is really around member city contributions and federal funding followed by PTF. Again, no changes to the multi-year budget for these sources. And here's just a recap of those projects for expenses. So again, this presentation is just for information, but I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Brady.
Quick question, Gilbert Road extension. Is that
Sir.
going to get, are we going to ever figure that out or what? I mean, is the contractor going to, I mean, those cars could be like depreciated fully out and time to replace, right? Before you make payment. What's the plan? Is there a schedule or time on that? I know it's you're working with the contractor. I'm just there. Is there an estimate of when that might get resolved?
Thank you, Mr. Brady. I don't know off the top of my head, but I could certainly share that information with you. I know that having this project hanging out there is a little bit of a pain.
Hey, well, you know, if you can get away with running cars without having to pay for them, that's a pretty good deal. So
Yeah, you know, they're very technical pieces of equipment, and we certainly want to hold the contractor accountable.
yeah,
to
no, I
all the scope.
Okay.
So, but I'll get some information.
okay,
share that
that'd be
with
helpful. I'm just
staff.
curious. I mean, it's a good deal for you guys, I guess, as long as you're not paying interest or something. So good.
Any other questions on this item? All right, no action on this item, but we'll move it forward. We'll move forward to the board. All right, so that takes us to the last item, which is the report on current events and suggested future activities or suggested future agenda items. Anything from the committee? I just want to mention, you mentioned earlier the opening of the Northwest Extension. I just want to give kudos to the Valley Metro team, particularly Trevor Collin and Tony Santana. A couple mentions I want to make on the City of Phoenix side are Marcus Coleman and Jim Tashner. And then I know John Krebs with Q, was key to making this happen. It's significant because it's opening substantially earlier than what had been planned by quite a bit. And so that's a huge accomplishment. We're very excited about it. Just wanted to say thanks. All right, so that concludes our meeting today. Thank you, everybody. Thanks.